Back at the car.
Gemini way, yeah.
This is good. Right here. Right here. Right here. Right here.
Sprinklers in the background.
Right here is good. So film it that way. I've got sun on the face, and so let me tell you why this is so powerful. Because this really is really awesome. So what I was doing, so this morning, because I love the New Testament, right? I really do. But for whatever reason, God keeps pulling me back to the Old Testament, always, like all the time. And I keep trying to work out why. I know the Old Testament is super important, and it's the basis of Judaism. It is the basis of the Judaic faith, right? Because many people look at the New Testament as there's no abrogation. God doesn't revise, right? It's almost like Christianity or a faith and belief in Christ fulfills all the Judaic prophecies. All of Judaism points to Christ, to Christ's arrival. Everything points to Christ's arrival. And then Christ arrives in the New Testament. It's almost as if, as you're reading, you start to realize that back in time, in the Old Testament, are all the answers. All the answers. So I was in Exodus and I was reading about how, because I love reading, right? So, every time I read and I try to, the funny thing is you read and you haven't read perfectly. Like you read, but then you go back and then you go to Genesis and you come back to Exodus and you go, oh my goodness, I missed that and it was so important. How can I miss sections? I'm reading and yet I'm missing sections. It's like, how does that happen? Anyway, here we go. Here's the meat of this. So I'm reading Exodus, okay? And in Exodus, what happens is God gets the Israelites out of Egypt, across the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, right? Across the sea, the Red Sea, across the Red Sea, not the Dead Sea, across the Red Sea. And as the Israelites are moving through the Red Sea, the chariots, literally the Egyptians are behind them. And God takes their wheels off and they get quagmired in the sand and whatever. And it goes on it's overnight. They start off going through the Red Sea during the day, and then it's nighttime, and the next morning is when it happens. So they're going through a day to night to the next morning. They're actually going through the Red Sea. It's a long journey. It's not like a sea opens, they go through and close it. No, it's through the night. The pillar of light which guided them, the pillar of cloud, comes to the back of them to keep them safe and protected. It keeps a shield between them. And what's really amazing is in Genesis 15:7, God says to him, I am your shield and abundant blessing, your abundant reward. I'm your shield and your abundant reward. And what is so fascinating is that as the Israelites go through the Red Sea falls in on the Egyptians, right? And literally gets rid of all of them. And God, in one of the biblical sections, we read, he says it twice. He describes, it's almost like, and I thought, why is God talking about it twice? Because he says it in two different ways. He says, as the Egyptians were going through behind the Israelites, the sea closed in on them, right? And they were obliterated. But then he uses, in the same paragraph, he says it again. He says it in a different way. He says that, I wish I had that in front of me so I could quote it directly, but he says, the Egyptians didn't see it coming. Like the sea just collapsed in on them so that they were all destroyed. Almost like a repeat. And I thought, that's unusual. Like, why repeat it? And then God, it's like feeling, go back to Genesis. I want to show you something. So I went back to Genesis. And in Genesis, there's a section where God, and I'll take my time with this because I really want to try and recall the exact phraseology that is used. It is just before Genesis 15:7, right before, it's the section right before it, obviously Genesis 14, where Abram, who's not Abraham yet, Abram has just obliterated the enemy who Chaldean, I think his name is. It's quite a big name, Chaldean. He's just obliterated him, and he is getting recognized. He comes into the city of Jerusalem, which was Salem. It wasn't called Jerusalem yet. It was called Salem. And as he arrives, he is hosted by the high priest of Jerusalem, Melchizedek, from which Christ is from the line of Melchizedek. We are from the line of Melchizedek. A very mysterious character, because he doesn't appear very much in the Bible, and everybody is very like, who is he? But what's fascinating is that Genesis 15 opens with, listen to this, and God appeared before Abraham as the Word. So God appears to Abram as Jesus, right? He appears as the Word. It says very clearly, Genesis 15, he appears as the Word, which is so amazing. And what's really interesting is that, you know, and I was saying this yesterday as well in the car, is that when God makes a covenant with us, right? When he makes a covenant with you, Curtis, or Theo, or myself, or anybody, and especially with Abram, we see this with Abraham. He makes a covenant with Abraham. Abraham falls asleep in mid-covenant. It's like, what? He just falls asleep. Okay? After he cuts up all the animals, you know, in halves, and then God has to walk through the animals, through the middle of the animals. Now, you've got to remember that there is no animal that we can give God that is good enough. No animal. There's nothing. You can put a cow to the slaughter, any animal, but it's not good enough. And God knew that. That's why when he says to us that he is making a covenant with us, what God does is he makes a covenant with himself in case one of us lets him down. So when he makes a covenant with you, he is also making a covenant with himself, because almost invariably you're going to let him down, or I'm going to let him down, right? So he does it with himself so that his promise fulfills, so that he brings his promise into fulfillment. What's really interesting is that later on we know that nothing that mankind or any human would have been a suitable enough sacrifice. So guess what he does? Once again, hearkening to Genesis 15:7 in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, he sends himself as the perfect sacrifice. So that perfect sacrifice can only come from God. And it's only through him that we have a perfection, right? But the message doesn't end here. There's a little bit more to this message, which I thought was quite valuable, and that is, when Jesus Christ walks on the earth as God, he is God, right? When he walks upon the earth, he has this line of purity that extends right back to Melchizedek, right? The high priest of God. But what is intriguing is that it was almost as if God held a line of purity, a complete line of purity from the very beginning in the Adamic race, that this one race was going to be allowed to bring into the world Christ. And it was by, I wouldn't say by virtue of, but by covenant. You know, here's the thing that is really fascinating. Until 1948, it was called a Jewish nation. In fact, when President Truman thought of what was he going to call the Jewish nation, as he was about to announce the Jewish nation, he crossed it out and he put on there Israel. Until then, Israel was not known as a name. Now watch this.
Whoa.
Yes, what's fascinating is it may have been referred to as Israel, but never as a recognized, it was never recognized as Israel. Now I'm going to blow you away, right? Watch this. The Old Testament is written in 3,800 BC. It's about 4,000 years, right? And then tack on another 2,020 years. You're talking about, as the Jews have recorded the time, 5781. We're in 5781, according to the Jewish calendar. But here's what's really interesting. In Genesis, right? In Genesis, we get to know about the Israelites, right? The nation of Israel. But it's mentioned by name as Israel, not Israelites, Israel. Israel in Exodus, right? For the first time, it's mentioned by name as Israel in Exodus, as a nation.
Okay.
So God had already predicted that Israel of today would be called Israel back in Exodus, which is absolutely amazing. Anyway, that's the message.
Israel back in